We're going to get the committee started. My name is Mark Shanahan, and I am the chairman of the Columbus Energy Review Committee. And I will introduce our other committee members in a moment. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, either in person or through GTV, we are putting together recommendations for Mayor Coleman and Council President Ginther about whether or not Columbus should pursue the aggregation of both electric and gas purchases for its citizens. So very basically what that means is that the law allows a municipality, after going through a review process, going to the ballot, developing a plan, to actually serve as a master buyer of electricity and or gas with a goal of developing a comprehensive approach to energy in the city. And obviously one of the goals of that process is to lower the cost for the city's residents. This group has been pulled together by the mayor and Council President Ginther to make a recommendation about whether or not the city should proceed on that. And what we have done in a series of hearings is try to gather information about what aggregation actually is and how it works. We've heard from a number of other cities that have done aggregation, both on the gas and the electric side, heard about their experiences, heard some of the pluses and the minuses that face a city that wants to move in this direction. Today we're looking at a different topic, which is to try to think about the meaning of how to use aggregation perhaps for broader goals than just lower cost. Obviously lower cost is very important, but a number of the programs we've looked at have used the aggregation process as a way to drive local economic development, as a way to encourage the use of local renewable fuels, solar, wind being the most obvious examples to get their gas or electric, and to drive efficiency programs. We know that even with aggregation, over the next few years, the cost of electricity and gas will probably go up. And so are there things that this program could give to the people of Columbus as benefits that allow them to conserve and use their energy more efficiently and therefore result in lower bills? The process is that we will have a couple of more hearings of this group, and then we will formulate a recommendation that goes to the mayor and to city council. If we recommend yes, we should do this, then city council has to consider that question and make a decision about putting an issue on the ballot in November through which citizens of Columbus would be asked whether or not they wanted the city to move forward. If people say yes, we do, then the city designs a plan and goes out for bids and goes through the process after certification by the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio that it can do so, of selecting essentially a vendor for the power, the gas or the electric, that will be provided. So it's a long process with lots of opportunity for citizen input. These hearings are just the beginning of that. What we'd like to do today during the hearing is we're going to have 3 presentations. If you have questions, we would ask you to write those down on the index cards that are available up on the table. Folks will collect those and get them to us, and then the members of the committee will ask questions directly of the presenters. Let me introduce the members of the committee who are here, and I'm going to start over on this side of the table with Aparna Dial, who is Director of Energy Services and Sustainability at The Ohio State University. Next to her is Jim Sweeney, Executive Director of the Franklinton Development Authority. followed by Cheryl Roberto, Associate Vice President with the Environmental Defense Fund and a former Public Utilities Commission member. And over here we have Cindy Farson, the Director of the Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging. I always get the 3 A's mixed up. Area Agency on Aging. There are other members, a couple of them I believe may join us today. Pastor Tyrone Laws from the New Hope Baptist Church and George Walker from the Linden Area Commission. And I'm sorry, Regina Clemens from Impact Community Action Agency. So today we're going to hear presentations. First from Brandy Whetstone of Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission about some exciting work that they have been doing in the energy area that may help guide us about what's possible here. Then we're going to hear from Ted Ford, who is the president of Ohio Advanced Energy Economy, to talk about the possibilities of job creation and company creation in the advanced energy area in Central Ohio. And then Trish Demeter from the Ohio Environmental Council, who's going to talk very specifically about the opportunities for renewable energy. So with that, let me turn it over to Brandy and ask her to come up, and we're going to put a mic on her.
Well, thank you for inviting me here today. Thank you to members of the committee. My name's Brandy Whetstone. I work with the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. We're an association of local governments and organizations in a 12-county area of interest here in Central Ohio. And, excuse me, we have programs and services to address transportation, government affairs, housing, energy, and environment. And today I'm going to present to you a report that is actually not released yet, so you're getting an inside view, a sneak peek of some of the high-level results from this report that we worked on last year in 2013. So it's the Regional Energy Action Plan for the Columbus region. So what is this Energy Action Plan? It provides us with an overview of the economic, social, and policy realities in our region and in the state related to energy use and development. And it also includes a set of recommendations that MORPC can consider so that we can figure out what our role is in advancing the region's interests in energy and environment. It was prepared by the National Association of Regional Councils, or NARC. MORPC is a member of that. It includes other regional councils across the country, funded by the Energy Foundation, and the project team included, along with MORPC, EWI and Colorado Energy Group. So all of these different partners work together to bring together some data sources and do the analysis. So I think that it's a good starting point for us, and then we also identified a lot of areas where we could use further data and study to define it further. But moving forward, the method, we started by collecting current information, gathering partners, actors in this, and also quantifying energy use in the state and the region, and reviewing current policies and energy initiatives. We evaluated that information, looked at our strengths and weaknesses, and then from that, there are recommendations based on some of the strengths that we identified to help advance a stronger energy economy. We also did some peer review. We had a lot of good stakeholders review the document, including OSU, Ted from Advanced Energy Economy, the City of Columbus, OEC, and many other partners at the state and local level. I apologize for all of these words on the slide, but I'm trying to condense all of the information. It's a 70-page report, so I'm trying to give you a big picture view of some of the significant findings. Those include, the region is growing, so we're obviously expected to increase energy consumption. The region has a higher per capita energy use than the rest of the state and the country. 86% of total energy generated is wasted in the process. That's a U.S. average. But locally, from this information, that waste impacts the regional economy, costing us $1 to $2 billion. We've discovered there's very little energy generated locally, but we do have a lot of opportunities and a lot of strengths in the region to expand that. We've had significant ARA investments to kind of jumpstart some projects for energy efficiency and renewables and other forms of generation. But there's a need for longer-term capital investments to continue those the progress that we've made. And that obviously federal and state policy regulations will impact the reliability, the diversity of our energy choices, and the price of energy. So that's a kind of a high-level overview of the major findings in the report, and I'll delve into some of the areas a little bit more as we go. First, just to give you a quick snapshot of the region, we gathered a bunch of information about population, income, employment, and business. So we know now that we have 2 million people. We're expected to have 2.5 million by 2035. The region is growing faster than the rest of the state. We have a third of the state's population. So something to think about as we plan for the future. We need to accommodate this growth in the region. And we have a lot of assets that we can boast about: 54 colleges and universities in this 12-county area, 15 Fortune 1000 headquarters like Wendy's nationwide, Scotts Miracle-Gro. And we do have diverse employment sectors. There isn't a single employment sector that represents more than 17% of employment in the region. So I think that's a strength too, having that diversity within the region, both in that way and also diversity as far as having, urban, suburban, and rural communities coming together and sharing some of the same interests. So, energy and air and water don't know political boundaries necessarily, so we all can share in the benefits and the consequences of our decisions at a regional level. So, City of Columbus, snapshot, stuff you may already know. We have, at least 800,000 people, the 15th largest city in the country. Same square mileage as Chicago with a third of the population. And we do have, fortunately, a strong sustainability focus here with the mayor's office and the Green Team, the Green Spot program, and many other initiatives that are coming out of Central Ohio and Columbus. So I think that's something that we can use to continue to lead by example in the region. Now here's some, I think, important facts for you regarding energy consumption in this region that we're looking at. Using 3% more energy than the average Ohioan, 8% more than the average American, and using electricity 4.5 times the rate at which it's being generated. So that's equal to 1 to 2 billion wasted, and we can see there's missed opportunities in energy efficiency in the region that could, allow us to make some low-cost or no-cost improvements to save consumers money and reduce our impact on the environment. Some of the clean energy opportunities that were identified in the report, and there are others, this is kind of a high-level view. Ohio is a national leader in the wind supply chain in manufacturing, and we have an estimated 3,800 jobs in the solar-related industry. Statewide, we do have a lot of potential for combined heat and power at our manufacturing facilities, hospitals, and other large institutions. We do have innovative energy storage projects. For example, AEP has pilot projects for battery backup systems in Central Ohio. And we have premier research institutions that really give us a strength in innovative technologies like Battelle, EWI, OSU. And just kind of a fact about Columbus ranking in the top 40 cities for LEED project activity, so for green building activity here. And there's a lot of opportunities in energy efficiency, solar, and waste to energy related initiatives. So there's a lot of potential. We have a lot of strengths in the region and in the city of Columbus that we can build on. And I think one of the things that we want to look at is how we can leverage those strengths and also start to remove some of the barriers to deploying cleaner energy sources, continuing to create jobs in the region and protect the environment all at the same time. This is an example of information that we generated in a chart looking at the capacity for solar, waste to energy, and biomass. Just to give you an idea, these are identified as our stronger points in renewable energy for electricity. Wind is included in the report as well. But we had so much information and so many charts, I just kind of picked out some high-level information there. Wind is also a resource that we can tap into. It's more favorable in the western part of the state and near Lake Erie, but there are some smaller wind projects in central Ohio. This is an example of a map that was produced through this report. There's several maps highlighting data that we collected through this process. This shows solar installations. Information was taken from the PUCO and other sources, so you can kind of at least get a snapshot of where the different installations are located, where they're concentrated. And we have also a list of all of those facilities as well. So you can go into the report and dig into more detail if you'd like to know more, and that'll be released sometime next week, so we look forward to that. We came up with a set of 8 recommendations out of this report. The first being what would seem to be an obvious, conducting regional energy planning initiative, getting together our stakeholders with diverse viewpoints across the region to prioritize where we're going, and also focusing on the emerging sectors we identified in that, which include energy storage, data warehousing, buildings, and agriculture. So those were all sectors that I think they're identifying that deserve more study and more advancements to achieve further energy goals, and also I think boost the economy at the same time. There's also some information about job development in the report, highlighting the existing efforts that we have across the state and in the region. So that's another asset that we can expand on and continue to coordinate with the public and private sector. Another area is energy assurance, with local governments having to address when there's emergencies, power losses, looking at how we can be prepared with whatever comes our way, and also include energy efficiency and renewables in that process to increase reliability and be more economically competitive. So, and I think that's another area where, I know I haven't really touched on aggregation yet, that's an area where aggregation could be an advantage as well, because we're able to diversify our energy sources. Another area is shale gas, some of the opportunities in there. While it is an important transitional source, we do need to be aware and address the environmental impacts of that energy source. There's some focus on transportation. A lot of our energy consumption is due to transportation. We can do a better job of moving people and goods more efficiently across the region. So we address that. We address alternative fuels and the capacity for that in the region as well, which isn't something we're really addressing today. But a big area of focus, I think, for us is embracing the economics of green. And that's also where aggregation can be recommended as a tool to stabilize the costs of electricity in the future, but also a tool to support clean energy sources. And so I think that's one of the really great tools in the toolbox that we have, and I commend the city and this committee for taking a closer look at that and how it can benefit customers in the city of Columbus. Other areas we're looking at is lending, addressing the barriers to capital costs to make energy improvements in clean energy, and that can include things like property assessed clean energy, which we're looking into more deeply now and pursuing. There's a lot of interest in the region in that area. Finally, policy. MORPC does have a policy agenda, and one of those areas is to continue to promote energy efficiency and renewables in the region, and also anticipate impacts that could come from Section 111D of the Clean Air Act, which addresses carbon pollution. So again, big picture view, 8 recommendations that we're going to I think, build some consensus around and prioritize where MORPC would play the best role in the region. And we're looking at how we can continue to help reduce barriers to clean energy and energy efficiency. And I think that community choice aggregation is one of those ways that we can do that. So in summary, we do have a tremendous opportunity in Columbus to support clean energy at a competitive cost. It gives the city significant buying power for consumers so that the cost is more competitive. And you can diversify energy sources in the process, which has a benefit, social, environmental benefits. And Trish will talk a little bit more about the environmental issues related. And I agree with the fact that energy efficiency should be a central part of that process as well, because there's still a lot of opportunity out there to reduce our energy consumption and be more efficient with our homes and in our buildings. And MORPC does offer a home energy efficiency program where we go to communities. We provide energy audits and install improvements in people's homes so that they can save energy and money. So that's definitely an area of focus that we have at MORPC. So we do have an interactive map on our website at morpc.org. And on that map, you can go through all of these various layers. You just have to play with it a little bit. You can bring up the different results that we've compiled with solar installation, alternative energy. You can look at where there's alternative fuel stations, CNG stations, and you can also get a little bit more information about population and so forth. So I thank you very much for your time today. We're just beginning to look into some of these issues, and we welcome stakeholder involvement at MORPC, and we like to consider ourselves a convener in the region where we can bring diverse stakeholders and viewpoints together. So thank you again, and I'd like to see if the committee has any questions.
Let me start off with one question. I think I got a hint about it, but can you just say a little bit more, Brandy, about the process that will take place after the report is released next week?
Yeah, definitely.
Could you repeat the question, please?
He would like to know about the process that takes place when we release the report and after. I will let you know that we have just made some transitions at MORPC, and we have a new department called the Energy and Air Quality Department, which didn't exist previously, but it brings together our energy programs with our air quality programs. And I think one step that we're taking is we're going to expand our stakeholder involvement in our working group that meets bi-monthly. And we welcome new members to our Energy and Air Quality Working Group, where we can talk about some of the priorities that we have for the region. We're also starting to, I think, develop some ideas and projects to get a regional PACE district so that we can help address some of those cost barriers to making clean energy improvements at our commercial industrial sites in the region as well. And PACE it's called PACE Property Assess Clean Energy. And PACE is a way to finance improvements on your building by making payments on your property tax over several years. So that really reduces that barrier for large capital investment up front, and you see that payback much quicker from the energy savings. So, but it involves a process of setting up districts and special improvement districts and things of that nature. So,
any other questions, Jim?
Did I get this right? Did you say 86% of the energy created is wasted?
yes, and that's taken from the report.
How does that happen? Is a lot of that in transmission?
Yes, that includes, I should have clarified, that does include transmission lines as well. And so that brings together that total number. And something to mention too is with that loss in transmission, having local generation helps to reduce that waste, which is another benefit to the region with producing more clean energy and having more jobs associated. So Good question.
That goes to my other question, and I do neighborhood revitalization in the center city, and a couple other statistics really made me start thinking about urban sprawl. I know that's something you talk about at Morpsey probably quite a bit. I assume is still one of your policy issues. That Columbus uses 8% or wastes more than, is it 8%, or is it Columbus wastes 8% more than the rest of the nation? Was the other stat?
Oh, the region, the Columbus region consumes 8% more energy than the rest of the country on average. And they think it's largely due to transportation as well. And that ties into the idea of us growing and our development patterns and how we can move people and goods around the region.
It sounds like.
So,
the other example that we are, what did you say, geographically the same size as Chicago, but has a third of the population.
That's right.
And these all go back to inefficient use of space and having energy and vehicles and people traveling greater distances than in a less efficient way. And this will go to the next speaker as well, as on the environmental front. So I just wanted to clarify those things because I think this goes back to the decades-old argument about urban sprawl and reinvesting in center city neighborhoods, and I wanted to make that point.
Yes, that is a point that you can take from it. And just to clarify, too, obviously the report covers all types of forms of energy, so we look at transportation energy as well as electric and gas. So,
any other committee questions? Well, we may think of some questions as we hear more presentations, and so we will do that, and we will collect any questions from the audience and do that at the end of the presentations.
Sure.
So thank you very much, Brandy.
Thank you.
I appreciate your being here today. We're going to follow Brandy with Ted Ford from Ohio Advanced Energy Economy.
Well, thank you for having me here today. I am Ted Ford. I'm the President and CEO of Ohio Advanced Energy Economy. Can everybody hear me in the back of the room? If not, I'll speak up. Our organization represents over 400 companies employing 25,000 Ohioans that work in what we call advanced energy, which includes renewable energy, energy efficiency, and advanced energy technologies such as combined heat and power and waste heat recovery and a number of other things. All of these are designed to kind of reduce our reliance on a centralized generation system, the grid, and to provide more customer choice as well as hold costs down for electricity going forward. So we have been working hard. This is a growing industry, by the way. It's a huge economic development opportunity for the state of Ohio. The U.S. advanced energy market is about $169 billion right now, and it's growing at double-digit growth rates. So it's been quite impressive what has happened. And a lot of it has been driven by policy. Energy is a very policy-driven sector of the economy. So you think of utilities as regulated monopolies. Obviously, a lot of the regulation supports existing sources of energy, particularly coal. And coal has been great and will continue to be part of the mix on our energy resources. But to really make change in the status quo, you have to have policies that promote the development and adoption of advanced energy technologies. So the state of Ohio, back 6 years ago, when Mr. Shanahan was working diligently for the governor at that time, had the foresight to enact energy standards that would help promote the introduction of new technologies and new approaches. At that time, the assumption was that our sources of energy were going to be significantly constrained and that we were going to see significant increases in cost. So the goal of the standards that were created in 2008 was to provide a hedge against those cost increases and to diversify our energy resources at the same time. So there was a renewable portfolio standard, the RPS, which applied to renewable energy. 12.5% of our energy was to come from renewables by 2025. We had an advanced energy standard, another 12.5% by 2025, coming from things like combined heat and power, waste heat recovery, and a whole range of things that are being invented today. And the third part of it was energy efficiency. So the goal was to reduce energy consumption by 22% by 2025. And again, those things combined would offset our over-reliance on fossil fuels going forward. What happened shortly thereafter was we discovered shale gas, and as the opponents of these standards would say, the world changed. So the concept is that we have huge amounts of shale gas that can be tapped now through horizontal drilling techniques. And therefore, we don't have an energy shortage anymore, and we can probably remove these standards. So the governor, who was elected in 2010, Governor Kasich, facing the shale gas boom, convened an energy summit with 1,000 stakeholders. He participated in it personally for 2 days, and at the end of that endorsed the existing renewable energy, energy efficiency, and advanced energy standards, expanded the definition a bit, but put through a bill in 2012, Senate Bill 315, that really readopted the existing standards, expanded them, and addressed a number of issues related to shale gas. So just 2 years ago, we had a kind of a reinvestment of the state into this this line of policy. So, starting shortly thereafter, those standards came under attack, and they have been under attack since December of 2012. And unfortunately, this week, something bad happened. A bill called Senate Bill 310 was enacted by the legislature. It's now on the governor's desk, awaiting signature, and he's indicated he will sign it. So it does a lot of things to all of the standards, the most important of which I think is the 2-year freeze. There's a freeze on the standards for the next 2 years while a study committee reviews them for their cost benefit. So the perception is that these cost money and consumers' electric bills are going up, and we should therefore get rid of these standards or at least study them and determine whether or not they're worth the cost. The reality is there's been a lot of analysis already done that shows that they are saving consumers a lot of money, and will do so into the future, as well as diversifying our energy resources. So unfortunately, this bill passed this week, and we fought it hard for a year and a half, and it was an unusual process. Nobody has quite seen a bill go through like this with this much opposition. In fact, every editorial board in the state practically editorialized against it. Strong negative reaction from many large Ohio companies, including Honda, but it has in fact gone through. So I want to just talk a little bit about what it does to renewables. So again, the RPS we refer to here is a renewable portfolio standard. And it's been highly successful in driving investment into the state of Ohio. So there's been about $1.2 billion invested in wind farms, for example, in the state. And there's another $6 billion that was expected to be created over the next 10 years or so. This bill brings that to a halt, jeopardizes that investment, reduces the amount of renewable energy that we're going to be able to derive at the state level. Again, it freezes the renewable portfolio standard for 2 years. This also applies to energy efficiency. It's uncertain what's going to happen going forward. Certainly, in addition to freezing the standard, they also watered it down significantly. So when the standards, and when and if the standards actually resume, they're not going to be nearly as effective as they have been in the past. So we don't expect any PPAs, which are power purchase agreements, to be entered into probably for several years. So according to particularly the big wind developers, who are large international companies who have a lot of capital sitting on the sidelines, including about $2.5 billion right now for projects that have already been approved in the state, but will not go forward because of this law change. Those companies are moving that money to other states. 29 other states and the District of Columbia have standards like this, and that's where those projects will be going. It also expanded the definition of renewables to include hydropower, which in this case means that Pennsylvania hydropower, for example, can count as renewable energy in Ohio for the purposes of meeting the standard when and if it resumes. 2 old Ohio hydropower plants were included in the definition, so these were built in the 1980s, are paid for, depreciated, gone. They now count as renewable energy as part of the standard. And again, this Energy Mandate Study Committee has been defined in the statute as very, say, skeptical of the standards and kind of presents them as a cost to consumers that needs to be carefully evaluated instead of what's the cost benefit. So we're not terribly optimistic about how that study committee will proceed. So the question is, question that we're asking ourselves and our industry's asking, is this the end of renewables in Ohio? Is it the end of energy efficiency? What's going to happen next? And my response is similar to Speaker Boehner's last year when people opposed his budget agreement. This is not the end of renewables. It's not the end of energy efficiency. It's a challenge that's been put in front of us that we're going to have to figure out how to overcome, and we can do that. And I think there's 2 things that I would like to highlight that I think are really going to drive this debate further going forward. So next week, the U.S. EPA will issue rules to regulate carbon emissions in the nation, and each state will have an opportunity to come forward with a plan for how they will meet carbon reduction targets. The World Resources Institute conducted an analysis that showed that with our existing energy standards on the books, combined with perhaps a little more beefing up of advanced energy, that we could easily meet these targets, even as we're reducing the cost of electricity, diversifying our sources of energy. And if, in fact, we can't use those standards, the alternatives are much more expensive, much more difficult to implement, and will cause a lot more resistance on the part of consumers to comply. So we have a problem already, and one reason why this bill passed this week and is being signed into law is so that standards won't be available when these rules come out. But that's going to change the game in a big way. So this debate's going to be ongoing, particularly as the cost of alternative compliance comes into effect. The other thing is that I think is going to allow us to continue to move forward is just the thing that we're talking about here today. So the work MORPSI has done is outstanding. It's a step forward. It's a take control of our destiny, make something happen. And I think when you look at this state over the last 20 to 30 years, the regions have emerged as by far the most dynamic entities. The state obviously is important, but the regions have taken more control of their destiny and have made a big difference in terms of how they evolve, both in terms of economic development, education, you name it. It's been a region-driven effort. So I think what we're talking about here today really makes a lot of sense, a community aggregation. There's no reason why a region can't aggregate consumers and provide alternative sources of energy as a preference, and it's actually been done up in Northeast Ohio. So it hasn't been done, I think, with the sense of urgency that it could be done with across the state, and there's an opportunity, I think, for the Columbus region to emerge as a real leader on that and show the rest of the state how it can be done and work with the rest of the state to, among the major cities and major counties, to make these things work. So that's my presentation.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from committee members? Ted, let me ask you, what's your sense with your member companies of they looking at the current change in approach at the state level? How long do we have to get them to make investment decisions? If aggregation and 111D are drivers, do we have some kind of grace period to get some things in place, or what's your sense of that?
I think we've got to move quickly. So, some of the bigger companies in particular have defined the next 10 years in Ohio as the lost decade because they're not going to invest for a decade. And that's because of the timelines that they require to be able to commit capital, get approval of projects, start building them, and getting them up and running. So for the next decade, we expect most of their capital to go to other places where energy standards are still applicable. So that's a problem. In terms of smaller companies, I talked with one of our companies yesterday who expects to lose 75% of his business as a result of this. About the only projects he sees going forward without some kind of assistance from public entities are home installed solar, where people buy it because they have a value motive. They want renewable energy. So from an economic standpoint, it's going to be a significant setback. I don't think we have a grace period. Businesses don't just keep investing on hopes that something's going to change.
Is the Energy Mandate Study Committee supposed to finalize the findings by 2016? Is that the idea, to freeze it for 2 years while they do the work and study and come out with final recommendations?
Yeah, and a study like that could be done in 6 months, and it could be done without changing the standards while the study is underway. So unfortunately, we've got a 2+ year hiatus here, which will have a significant impact on the industry in the state, unless we have some alternative initiatives coming out of places like the Columbus region.
Energy isn't my field, but I certainly appreciate hearing the whole background for this bill that's been so controversial. So is there less local Ohio renewable energy to purchase? We heard last time about the option of purchasing local or from out of state or whatever. So does that just make that harder to buy, more expensive to buy? What's the impact there?
Yeah, it will make it harder to buy Ohio renewable energy, and it will make it more expensive to buy. So the standards include certain financing mechanisms that make these projects more affordable in a shorter period of time. That does drive adoption. So without that, we'll see a slowdown and an increased cost of getting it done. Again, I think there are numerous ways that we can attack that problem and continue to make it affordable. It will require decisions, such as the decision the Columbus region's considering to drive that. So you have to have some kind of an economic driver that helps bring that cost down and make those projects viable. But we have a lot of companies out there right now that know how to do it. And if we can provide them with the opportunity as an alternative to what the state provides, I think we can make it go. And it'll be a regional thing.
Great. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate your coming here today.
I'm happy to do it.
And we now will hear from Trish Demeter from the Ohio Environmental Council.
Good morning, everyone. Hi. I'm Trish Demeter. I'm the Managing Director of Clean Air and Energy Programs for the Ohio Environmental Council. Thank you very much to the study committee for inviting me here. Really excited to be part of this discussion. And what I'm going to talk about today is, well, first, before I get into that, I want to tell you a little bit about who the Ohio Environmental Council is. We are a 40-year-old state-based environmental not-for-profit organization. We advocate for healthy air, water, and sustainable choices for energy. We are a facilitator for I put this on there for the Ohio Coalition for Combined Heat and Power. So we are all about, carbon-free or reduced carbon generation resources, not just clean renewables, but also advanced resources that Ted just talked about too. Today, what I want to cover, I was asked to present on the environmental benefits and other economic benefits for including energy efficiency and or renewable energy in an aggregation plan for the City of Columbus. So first I'm going to start off with a big picture and talk about why renewable energy and energy efficiency, why you would even want to do it, why would you even want to include it as an element in your aggregation plan. Talk a little bit more about the benefits for including these resources in the plan. Get a little bit into what the options are. What have other cities done in terms of including renewable portfolio standards or goals as part of their aggregation plan and energy efficiency programming as part of a service that they offer to their customers. And then I do want to talk a little bit about consumer and voter attitudes towards renewable energy and energy efficiency. The good news is that people like this stuff, and they've consistently liked this stuff. So as the city moves forward, and if they do decide to move forward with aggregation, including renewable energy and energy efficiency can be an excellent selling point for voters when we get to the ballot measure. So I'll talk a little bit about some recent polling. I'd like to start off with the big picture. This is Ohio's generation mix. We are extremely reliant on coal-fired power in the state of Ohio. This is not unlike other Midwestern states, but some other Midwestern states that also have aggregation have a higher share of nuclear or natural gas. But this over-reliance on fossil fuel energy is risky, both to the environment and to consumers. If you think of an energy portfolio, much like you would as a stock portfolio, you don't always want to put all your eggs in one basket, because if something happens to the one resource that you are very reliant on, i.e. the price goes up or it fluctuates, it's a volatile market, then that puts consumers at the end of that fluctuation, and it's not always a good thing. Also, it's harmful for the environment. Ohio's coal-fired generation fleet is very old. Some of these plants are 50 and 60 years old. They're reaching the end of their life. A lot of them are putting out lots and lots of tons of toxic air emissions, harmful to our health. Sulfur dioxide, which is a lung irritant. Nitrogen oxide, which causes smog. Other particulate matter, mercury pollution, and that puts vulnerable populations at risk. Here in Central Ohio, there's about 120,000 adults and children who suffer from asthma, and this can be a big problem for them, especially as we get into the heat of the summer. Additionally, well, I'll go on to this next slide. So the first point I want to make about including energy efficiency and renewable energy into an aggregation plan are some benefits on the cost. We talked about renewable energy and energy efficiency being a good plan for state policy, but it's also a good plan or a good package deal for local aggregation. Renewable resources are largely price stable. They have in the past and in certain markets have been a little bit more pricey than traditional resources, but over the long term they are more stable in the sense that you don't have any fuel costs. So once you build your wind turbine or install your solar panel, you don't have to pay a market price for that coal or natural gas that goes into generating electricity. We've also seen precipitous drop in price. Solar prices in particular have come down exponentially over the last decade, and we just continue to see it coming down. Energy efficiency is consistently inexpensive. Every study that I've looked at has shown that energy efficiency is about 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour to deploy over the last decade or so, and it's because it's easy to get into a building, make it more energy efficient, reduce that waste that you see, We talked about general energy waste, but buildings on average waste about 30 to 40% of the electricity that they consume, and that's because we have old windows, bad insulation, drafty, drafts and holes that we don't see all the time. And when you compare this cost to what it costs to procure energy from the grid, we're looking at 5 to 9 cents per kilowatt hour to actually purchase new generation. So it's very cost effective. I would say the economic advantages of including renewable energy and an energy efficiency program within aggregation is that you can really drive local development, both in the economic and also reap all of the environmental benefits of generating your own electricity within the region, within the city of Columbus, or within the state of Ohio. I think Ted touched on this a lot, but there really is great job creation potential for investing and really driving that investment from the local level. We don't really have, the recent news from Senate Bill 310 doesn't give us a whole lot of hope that the state level policy is going to drive this investment. And what we've seen across the country is that states or cities are really driving this investment. They're really leading the charge. They're picking up the slack from where state and federal policies are lacking. So the job benefits, just a feature of having this development happen right here in our community. These jobs can't be exported. We're talking about jobs that represent a wide range of skills, from laborers to folks that do weatherization, all the way up to engineers that have sophisticated degrees. So you're attracting a wide range of jobs to the region. Energy efficiency in particular is very job intensive. For every $1 million invested by a utility or an entity, you see about 21 permanent jobs. And comparing that to traditional generation, $1 million in a coal or a natural gas plant will get you about 8 or 9 jobs. So it's a very, comparatively, it's a very job-intensive way to go. As Ted mentioned, we've already got a great workforce here in the state of Ohio, and with Senate Bill 310 passing, they obviously could use some work and some demand. So that's a great thing to have, that you don't have to build this industry up. It's already here, they're already working, they're very skilled, and they know what they're doing. Consumer benefits, like to mention this, energy efficiency is a really good deal for electric ratepayers. For every $1 invested, the ratepayer will see about $3 in savings on their bill. So when coupled this with, if you couple an energy efficiency plan with a renewable plan, you can actually see, if you couple it with an aggregation plan, you can actually see those prices come down even more. So you're leveraging the benefits of aggregation. If you add energy efficiency, you're driving down that cost even further for your consumers. It improves local building stock. This is a marketable thing for the city, is that if you have an investment and you're partnering with prominent commercial property owners in the state or in the city or within the region, and they're getting the benefit of some of these energy efficiency programs, then it's a better marketing tool for them, for potential business customers coming in, because they can say, here's our price per square footage, but your anticipated energy cost for the year is much lower than what you'll find elsewhere. So it's a great tool to attract new businesses to the region. Getting into a little bit of the dynamics, or a little bit of the nitty-gritty on what models could look like, how other cities have done this. I know that the study committee did hear from other cities. I wasn't here for that presentation. I'm not sure if they covered any of their green portfolio that they have worked on. But what's important to know about potentially considering a renewable component or an energy efficiency program as part of the aggregation plan is that the city is in the driver's seat. There's so much flexibility on how to design your supply contract and what your requests for proposals look like. There's lots of ways that you can do it. There's lots of examples throughout the nation, and even right here in the state of Ohio, on how to craft this plan. But you have a lot of flexibility. There's no right way or wrong way to do it. And you can make it very appropriate for your city. So it doesn't have to be, there's no off-the-shelf way to do it. You can really be innovative in how you craft your plan. And I also like to mention that the city's aggregation contract, should the city decide, and the city council and the mayor's office decide to move forward with aggregation and put it on the ballot for residents to vote on, the contract itself will hold tremendous market power. There are very few other cities as large as Columbus that have done an aggregation supply contract, and with that you would probably be in the top 5 in terms of how many customers would be served under that aggregation contract. So you would exert tremendous market power and could be very ambitious with your goals in terms of demanding a low price for supply, but also goals for deploying new renewable energy projects or those energy saving efficiency programs I've been talking about. So other cities, Chicago, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, they all provided or included a renewable energy component in their supply contract. At the same time, they brought the cost down for their consumers. So there's a way to craft these policies to ensure that you're getting the benefits of, that bulk purchasing power benefit of aggregation, but also seeing new renewable projects and renewable energy be part of the mix. This is a new project, Southeast Ohio Public Energy Council, which is the city of Athens and all of Athens County. They are doing something, they're in the process right now. They've passed their aggregation, but they're putting together their plan and will be issuing their RFP, I think sometime within the next year. And their plan has a very aggressive 3-year plan to deploy or to create new demand for local renewable projects and also deploy new energy efficiency programs. And they've structured it in a way to ensure that that price benefit for the end consumer stays, with the plan every 3 years. So customers in Athens County, if it's done right and if there's a response to their RFP, they'll see an immediate drop in price, but they'll also see great new development happen out in Southeast Ohio. Northeast Ohio Public Energy Council, or NOPEC, one of the largest government aggregators up in Northeast Ohio, they administer an energy efficiency program directly to their member communities. And it's in the form of grants, so that has helped their government buildings, but also commercial sector, really improve their business stock and have access to capital they wouldn't otherwise have access to do those energy improvements. So just to put a bug in your ear, I don't want to get too much in the weeds with this because obviously we're not even at this stage in the game, but just to put some thoughts out there about what an ideal model would look like for including energy efficiency and renewable energy. As I said, there's lots of different ways to do it, but these are just a few ideas. Setting an overall goal for renewable, clean, or carbon-free supply in the supply contract would be a good way to go. Some cities like Cincinnati and Cleveland have gone as high as 100%. And you can meet that through the procurement of renewable energy credits, and you could create within that overall goal a local renewable, however you want to define local, if that's Central Ohio or the state or surrounding states, to really stipulate that part of that overall goal should come from, close to us, so that we get the environmental benefits of those new projects and that we also see less waste with the transmission and distribution. You could also create just a renewable energy fund or a clean energy fund that could go directly to help financing, and there's lots of different ways to finance local projects, so it gives companies and customers access to capital to develop a rooftop solar project or something like that. So you can actually create a separate fund for local businesses, churches, other folks to tap into that low-cost loans or however you want to structure it. So there's a lot of different ways you can drive that demand here locally. Energy efficiency. There are a lot of examples how this is done. Most commonly, there's a energy efficiency fund that's set aside, essentially where the part of the plan is to create new programs or to couple new programs with existing programs in the area. MORPC has a great weatherization program. Columbia Gas offers rebates and incentives. AEP offers rebates and incentives, and really leverage what's already happening in weatherization or commercial efficiency upgrades. You can really leverage what's already happening and kind of bolster that to expand the market and expand it to even more customers. And then here's the voter attitudes. I wanted to just touch on this, is that there's been a lot of polling that's done. Ohio Environmental Council has been part of that. I know Ohio Advanced Energy Economy has done polling. We have polling from many years ago up to very recently, but just to pull some numbers of a poll that happened, I think I pulled most of these numbers from a poll that happened last year, is that we see a lot of voters, no matter if they're Democrat, Republican, Independent, they prefer or favor clean energy over other sources of energy. And when you ask about energy efficiency, most of the responses that we get is that it's just common sense. Reducing waste is just, it's a common sense thing to do. And we see a lot of bipartisan support for renewable energy. And then looking specifically at Columbus voters, in terms of job creation, they really do believe that if you have local investment in an energy efficiency or renewable projects, that you'll see local job growth. So overwhelmingly, people believe that it will create jobs more so than it would hurt jobs or have no impact on jobs. And so I think that I'd just like to mention this. If the panel, or if the study committee would like more information on polling, we have tons of information on this, but it just goes to show you that voters really like this stuff, and if it's packaged in a way that they know it's not going to increase their bills, then they're much more likely to go for it and support it, be a rallying point for even the ballot measure if we get to that point. So in conclusion, I just want to say that the city has a lot of flexibility. It has a lot of potential to further the sustainability goals of the city of Columbus, which are great already. And it also is a really great way to drive new demand for renewable energy and energy efficiency within the city. So we're excited to be part of the conversation and want to be a resource to the study committee. So, I'm happy to answer any questions, but also follow up with any additional information that you would think would be useful to you. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. Questions for Trish? Anybody have one? I have a question that just not to you, Trish, but to our other two presenters as well. And maybe while I'm asking that and hearing some of the response, if people in the audience have questions, if you write them down on one of the cards, we can get that and put that in front of our experts for the day. I guess one of the questions that comes to my mind is we've talked about aggregation being something that can contribute to local economic development. And I'm just wondering if in the work that you all have done looking at Columbus and the surrounding area, is there one particular thing like efficiency or solar or wind that we have more potential to use, and as local economic development, do we have strengths in a particular area? Or is it across the board? And just to get your feedback on what you think that may be would be really helpful to my thinking.
Well, I'm sure I'll take a stab and just talk a little bit about energy efficiency. There's tremendous opportunity in energy efficiency. Building stocks, especially in a city like Columbus, we have lots of old neighborhoods, lots of old homes. My home was built in 1928, and I know that I don't fully walk my talk, but there's a lot of improvements I could make to even my own home that I haven't, even having lived there just for 4 years. So I think that there's just always tremendous opportunity for energy efficiency. We have definitely not made our building stock and our housing stock as efficient as possible. So there's a lot of waste that we could be working to reduce through energy efficiency, weatherization, and that is especially true for energy-intensive companies and institutions like our hospital system here in Central Ohio and our universities. So there's just tremendous potential there, and the workforce is there, very trained, and you can get to it rather quickly. You can deploy it pretty quickly, and it's very cost effective. In terms of renewable resources, I don't know if Ted or Brandy has any idea about availability and viability of those resources.
Well, I agree that energy efficiency is a great opportunity. We're also a growing region, so new building construction, making sure that we build new facilities as energy efficiently as possible is another opportunity. In terms of renewables, certainly solar is something that could be adopted in the region. Wind is really a more specialized resource. Most of the wind development is in the western part of the state, northwestern part. But all of those wind projects are large. They need customers, and there's no reason why Central Ohio customers couldn't buy wind energy and help drive those projects. So,
I agree with the first point about energy efficiency. We can't maximize the renewable energy resources that we do put in place unless we have energy efficiency there first. It's the fastest and cheapest way that we can reduce energy consumption. So that's the first thing that we should be doing, along with installing new clean energy sources. I think that can't be ignored as a first step. And I agree, solar is viable, more viable than wind in the region. And we do have some strengths as far as having some centers of innovation and technology in the areas of battery storage and backup power as well. So, but mostly I agree with all of these points that our speakers have said. So
we do have some questions from the audience, and actually you've touched on a number of them already, I think. I wanted to let people know, both here and who are watching on TV, that we also have a website, columbus.gov/Columbus Energy Review. And all of the presentations will be available at that website. And all the questions that we get from the audience as we move forward will be answered on that, particularly if they are answers that we can't necessarily give them right now. So, for example, one of the questions is whether or not the City of Columbus has considered adopting a streamlined solar permitting process. And I don't expect you three to know the answer to that, and I know the committee does not, but that's one that we can get the answer to and put up on the website and have it be available to everyone. I guess one of the things that struck people in the presentations, and it goes back to the question that Jim asked, is that number connected to the amount of energy that's wasted really shocks people. And I think a lot of that, in my mind, certainly in electricity, just has to do with the technologies. That a coal-fired power plant, if it's turning 40% of the energy value of the coal into electricity, that's considered highly efficient. And the other 60% is going up the stacks. Do you see things in the aggregation process that could begin to really address what now are sort of system-based waste of energy? How could an aggregation program try to address a huge issue like that?
I'm going to go back to some points that we've mentioned earlier, but I really appreciate some of the detailed information that you presented, Trish, because I think that laid out a good case for all of the considerations in aggregation with clean and energy efficient technologies. I think that in itself will help reduce some of that waste if you can include provisions that provide for energy efficiency programs for people's homes, businesses, and so forth, and also having more locally generated power will reduce some of those line losses and inefficiencies because they would be located right here in Ohio or Central Ohio or Columbus. So those two aspects will, I think, help reduce that waste. So.
Yeah, I would just add, there is significant interest in the financial markets around looking at regions and defining comprehensive energy efficiency projects that could generate a significant rate of return. So capital sitting on the sidelines on Wall Street is looking for investment vehicles where, say, a complete city downtown could be factored into a project and generate very significant returns. So there are ways to do that, and I agree the distributed generation is one way to really increase efficiency. You're using it at the source.
Yeah, I would just add one thing that the electric grid of the future looks very different than what it looks like today. Distributed generation is much more cost effective. It reduces that line loss waste. It's much more efficient and reliable for the end user. And I'll give you an example. If the city were to move forward with aggregation, it's not just about necessarily renewables, but also just thinking about distributed generation. You improve the grid reliability. You can create local facilities of refuge that would stay online during a power outage. And the example I'll give is Hurricane Sandy. The East Coast right now is looking very seriously at a resource called combined heat and power, and Ted mentioned this. It's a system that was commonly run on natural gas. It generates electricity, but also meets whatever thermal need you have at your facility. So it's great for hospitals and universities that have 24/7, 365 demand for lighting and for heating or cooling or refrigeration. And during Hurricane Sandy, when most people were out of power for 2 to 3 weeks, there were a couple of facilities that had a combined heat and power system, and they were able to stay online. And that's where they brought vulnerable populations. They had people come in and shelter there during a power outage during a very cold time of year. So it's an added societal benefit and community benefit to distributed generation if you have a system like CHP running on a semi-public facility like a university or something like that. So there are lots of other benefits just besides environmental too.
So looking at some of the questions, I guess one of the things people should be aware of is that our role is this committee's role is to make a recommendation to the mayor and city council about proceeding on aggregation or not. We haven't been asked to help design the plan that would try to implement aggregation if we move forward, but I think that we're hearing a number of issues raised that we can certainly flag to the mayor and city council to say, if you do decide to move forward, here are some issues you need to keep in mind. And I think that some of the things that you've been talking about here are precisely in that ballpark of issues that need to be carefully considered. And this may be a question that we can answer here, and I'm going to turn to the mayor's staff to help on this. Is it your understanding that the question that would go on the ballot if council decided to move forward is a relatively simple should we aggregate or not question, or can that question have component parts to it? And has that even been discussed yet by city council and the mayor?
I think that it can have multiple components. The basic question is whether or not we should do it, and whether we should do it for electricity and natural gas, or either or. So that's the first question, as to whether or not we should pursue the ballot initiative with the voters and let the voters decide whether or not we should do it. The other elements, we definitely want to hear from you as to what we should consider should the voters allow us to proceed. What should we consider in our proposal to create more value for the community by doing it?
And then I guess I would have a question for our three presenters, and you've sort of touched on this, but part of the debate around Senate Bill 310, there was a contingent, if you will, who used shale gas to argue that not only did we have more than enough fuel into the future, it was going to be cheap. And I wonder if you, from the material you've looked at, have a sense about what we should expect for either gas or electricity prices as we go into the future. This process would be, you'd probably be looking at sometime in 2015 before an aggregation would start if everything fell in line. And then you'd be entering into a 2 or 3 year contract. So I guess I'm asking if you've looked into your crystal balls, if you think, what do you think is going to be happening to those prices in 3 to 5 years, which is when we would be talking about trying to save people money?
Well, I will try to answer that. First of all, there's some complexities about shale gas. We know there's a lot of it. The question is how much of it can we extract? There's an infrastructure issue about how you build pipelines to get that gas to market, so there are costs associated with that. A very low price shale gas is not going to drive that kind of investment. So there is an incentive, I think, on the part of the producers and everyone else to get that price up so that they can finance what they need to finance as well as make money, which is what they're in business to do. The other issue is that with the explosion of shale gas production, there's a growing interest in exporting shale gas. So there are some 24 applications pending at FERC for shale gas or gas export facilities. Prices are higher overseas. It suddenly becomes profitable to send the gas overseas. If all of those are built, the estimate is they could export about 60% of our domestic gas supply. So I think the fundamental point is, don't count on something being cheap forever. You do have to have a plan with contingencies. All of the above is still a very viable option. So it's really necessary. That's my view.
Any other questions for our panel of experts here? Well, great. Let me thank you three again for coming and spending part of your morning with us. And you've given us some really valuable information to think about as we move forward. So thank you. And I hope we can reach out to you and ask other questions that we think of later. As we walk out the door and go, oh, I should have asked this. We can get those questions to you and get some help from that.
Can I make one final comment?
Yes, sir.
A lot of what we've talked about today sounds like we're bashing utilities, but in fact, the utilities are going to be critical going into the future. Their role is going to change. Their business model is going to change. And it's going to happen very quickly. So we need to be working with those utilities. They have an interest in making that transition of what the future grid looks like. And particularly, AEP, for example, who we've had quite a bit of interaction with, I think is really embracing this change. It's going to be painful, it's going to be hard, but we need to be working with them in order to let them fit their appropriate role in the future.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Well, let me ask the committee. We have a meeting tentatively scheduled for next week. And that then would be followed by a meeting where we would try to finalize recommendations. In talking with the mayor's staff, it seemed that the meeting next week could be a very valuable way for us to have a discussion among ourselves about what we've learned and what questions we think are still out there and issues that we need to think about going forward. I wonder if people have started to give some thought to what have you seen as the major issues that we need to wrestle with, and maybe that would be a good way to set up the agenda for a meeting next Friday to think about what we've heard a lot of information. So what are the questions that in your mind we need to get on the table and try to wrestle with in order to get to a recommendation? And anybody and everybody feel free to jump in on this.
Right now?
Yes, sir, right now.
Well, I think one of the biggest questions is what's the level of assurance we can give people that this will actually save them money rather than cost them money over time?
The other question is the duration of the contract, given the volatility of pricing, the unreliability of price forecasts. speaking to what money are we going to save and how long. So how long should what should be the duration of this contract be if we decide to proceed with aggregation?
Oh, okay, sorry. The first issue raised was what level of assurance can we give people that in fact through aggregation they will save money as compared to what they would get other ways. And then the question that Aparna raises is we've heard a lot about the volatility of prices in the energy market. What should be the duration? There's an issue around how long the city would go out in contract for. How long should a contract be given how volatile the prices are? And I think we heard from one of the cities with experience where they now, looking back on it, think they probably went a little bit too far out on a gas contract with very volatile prices, and then felt that they may not have saved what they could have, or may even have cost people money.
And the other thing to consider is what is the pricing mechanism? Are we going to accept a percentage of the, supplier, index it to market? It's something that we will not solve, but maybe it's something that the city has to consider when they put the details of this package together, if we decide to recommend
Okay, so
aggregation.
the pricing mechanism, when we go out for bid, if we move forward, one of the things we heard from a number of the other cities is that frequently the bids ask for a percentage off the cost to compare. And that's how they determine what the potential savings would be. And sometimes we heard, for folks who may not have been here, we heard one example where people locked in a set price. We heard another example or two where people had a fluctuating price that was totally tied to the cost to compare that the Public Utilities Commission produces, so there would always be X% below the cost to compare. A good discussion to wrestle with.
The other thing about reliability standards and response requirements in case power's shut down, do we put those requirements in the contract?
I think another question was put to us a couple meetings back. A point was raised that Columbia Gas has an agreement with the state as the supplier of last resort, and that agreement has a timeline on it. And that if we were to go to aggregation and then for some reason go back from aggregation, our supplier of last resort may not be in place at that time. Pardon me if I've garbled that, but I do think it's a question we should talk about.
And, inclusion of potentially energy efficiency requirements, renewable requirements, impact on pricing. As a result of these requirements, and then of course communication to and education of the community.
I'd like to get greater clarity on decision points. So for instance, if we were to recommend going to the ballot and the city was authorized to aggregate, could we suggest performance metrics that if they didn't see responses to contracts that came within them, they could walk away from it and choose to not implement it? I mean, at what point does the city have decision points, and would we have suggestions as a body about how they might think about using those decision points?
Yes, sir.
Well, having tried to do catch up on my homework and everything and getting the directions correct, but I think my question has kind of been dealt with, and that is the automatic question that would go to all our consumers in the local area, and that is, how do we alleviate the catch-22 fear? that people may have. If I sign up for this, if I get locked into this, what is the catch-22? Will I get, burnt later on type of thing? I think that fear needs to be alleviated. Yeah.
Well, and that actually raises another question that we heard from our presentations last time, question about the ability for people to opt out of the plan, either on a regular basis, which is required by law, people have to have that option, or during the plan, and whether or not you charge people when they do that.
Yes.
And we heard both yes, they have to pay a fee, and no, we let them leave for free. So that's another issue that folks have raised for us. But I think that very much ties into people's fear that they're being put into a plan that locks them in and they're not quite sure into what.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
Are there other questions that people may have? I think the other thing that it would be helpful for us to talk a little bit about and also get some guidance from the mayor and the council is as if we were to recommend that the council consider aggregation, is there a role for some kind of a citizens advisory committee as council moves forward, and particularly if they go to the ballot, when they start to put together a plan? How do we make sure that there's broad stakeholder involvement? Obviously, a lot of it will be left to the technical experts, as well it should be, but we've heard a lot of questions raised here that it's not the experts who will be the right ones to answer those questions. It's those of us who would be paying the bill.
Or something that we should discuss. The last presentation, they talked about, you had some cities that had the aggregation for gas and electric, and then some just for the electric. What direction should we go in? Should we consider both, or just one or the other?
Okay, so the issue is potentially, if we're going to go forward, you could go forward on both gas and electric. You could go forward on one and not the other.
Exactly.
And then another issue is whether or not, and there are challenges to this, but do you try to bid those together, or do you bid them completely separately? Because obviously there are a number of companies that can provide one or the other, and there are some companies that can provide both. And are there benefits to one way or the other on that? There are some legal complexities because the length of contract and the length of term for people being in the aggregation is different in state law. But that's another obvious follow-on to Gwen's question. Anything else?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, one of the real interesting components of this discussion to me has always been our capacity and option to use renewable resources is far greater than I had known. And I wonder I think when we discuss next time, we should find a way to articulate what the cost is, or what the cost isn't, I guess, of actually being able to select renewable wind sources as our aggregation policy. Much as I'm surprised to learn that Cleveland is 100% renewable. That's a huge selling point for a lot of people. What that actually means is a little confusing, but it's all good. I think that people are going to want to hear about that, and we should be able to articulate what that actually means, especially around cost.
If I remember correctly from the Cleveland presentation, they actually offered folks options on which plan to be part of, and one of them was the 100% green, and they offered a 21% savings versus the cost to compare. And then they offered them a 24% savings if they went with Brown Power. And they had about 50 people take the bigger savings option, which was really interesting.
Yeah.
Are there other questions that we would want to, and what I'm thinking, and tell me if this makes sense to you, is that we would probably, before our meeting next Friday, perhaps try to put together an outline of the issues that we've heard raised, and so we have sort of a common discussion base to start with. And next week we would really be going through the process of hashing out some details of what we think about those questions. And then it would be the following meeting, which is scheduled to be our last meeting, where we would actually try to hammer out recommendations that everyone felt comfortable with advancing and issues we felt needed to be maybe further explored or at least identified to the mayor and council as they move forward. Does that make sense to folks as a process?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think one of the useful tools was the list of questions that was presented to the municipal aggregators who were experienced. Mm-hmm. And starting with that and talking about what we heard and what we thought was most important might be a way to narrow down.
Okay. Great.
Mark, I just wanted to add another question in terms of time. You know, sort of wanted to think through this process and sort of play it out in terms of if it is recommended, what are the next steps and what's the timeline for each of these steps? When would this actually turn into an RFP or whatever the process is that the city follows for aggregation?
Right, and we actually, we can get more specific detail, but if I understand roughly, we would make our recommendation. City Council has until its last meeting before summer to vote to decide whether to put something on the ballot in this November. I think that's July 28th is their last scheduled meeting?
I believe so, but I also heard that not all the council members are going to be present, so there's really going to only be 2 meetings
Okay.
in July that they have, so I think it's middle of July is our document to get it
For the ballot in November. It would then, if it moved forward on the ballot, and if the recommendation was yes, council agrees, they put it on the ballot, and it wins in November, then you begin the process of getting it, of developing the plan. That plan then has to be certified by the Public Utilities Commission, and then it goes out for bids. So it's a pretty long process with a lot of checks and balances along the way. And we get to be the ones to either kick it off or tell them to stop. Or suggest that they stop, and then they decide. Okay. All right, folks. Well, thank you very much for folks who are watching. Just a reminder that CTV3 will put out a schedule of when all the hearings will be rebroadcast, as well as covering the 2 remaining hearings. We do have the website, columbus.gov/Columbus Energy Review, where all the material that we look at will be available to the public, and all the questions that have been asked will be put up on the website and be answered. Our next meeting is next Friday, and I look forward to seeing everybody there. So thank you all very much for coming, and thank you everybody for paying attention to what we're looking at. Thank you.